Now, let me bring in our next guest here. Joe Siracusa is the Dean of Global Futures in the Faculty of Humanities at Curtin University. He joins me now live from Perth, Australia. Joe, always good to see you here on the program. What do you make of this new warning from Joe Biden? Is he actually worried about the rising civilian death toll? Or do you think he's actually bowing to pressure from all these student protests in this election year?
Good afternoon, Per. Well, look, yeah, he's feeling the heat in his own party. The people on his left think what he's doing right now is really too little, too late. I mean, as far as they're concerned, the war in Gaza is illegal and immoral, and Joe Biden is into it up to his neck. His critics on the right will say that his efforts here now to rein in the Israeli forces in Rafah is obscene, as Senator Lindsey said, and Lindsey Graham, and he called it absurd. So, he got all this criticism. The president is reacting. Some people are now, is this a turning point, a breaking point? What I think it is a very ambiguous message. He's telling the Israelis, you can do whatever you want. We're going to give you whatever you want, but you can't have these because it's terrible optics, And so the president can't handle this pressure of these 2,000-pound bombs dropped on civilian population. I mean, he just can't handle that on the evening news. So he has this position now. While he says pause, the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, says on Capitol Hill this morning that he says we're assessing the situation. So in a sense, it's very vague, it's ambivalent, but the president's message is ambiguous. As far as the left is concerned, it's too little, too late. As far as the right is concerned, how dare you interfere with American support for Israel? So the president has actually had a very disappointing day himself. He's tried to clarify things, but all he's done, is sort of dug a hole for himself.
Right. I mean, he's choosing his words, though, really carefully here, warning Israel about going into population centers. That's what he's saying. And at the same time, he says Israel hasn't gone into Rafah. I mean, do you agree with this assessment from the U.S. president?
Well, the president has been opposed to this kind of warfare in urban center. Look, Rafah is the last place where folks are hanging out. I mean, there's no more population center. In fact, if you look very closely at your various packages on TRT, there's no Gaza left. The place is destroyed. This is the last stronghold probably of Hamas and others. And the president doesn't want to see these images of American bombs dropping on this population. And of course, the Americans are in this, we're talking about Jake Sullivan here and the State Department, Antony Blinken, others. They oppose the militarization of Gaza after the war. They don't want the Israelis camping in all for the next 20 years. And so they're opposed to that. They have all kinds of differences, but their differences are with this Israeli government. We have a right-wing government run by the zealots. And of course, Netanyahu has trouble resisting what these people want to do anyway. On the other hand, Americans would like Netanyahu to fight their kind of war. And what kind of war is that? It's urban warfare, the kind they conducted in Iraq and other places. So they want him to shift to this kind of thing. The trouble is that Hamas is just too close to Israeli population centers and to the rest of it. And the Israelis have one way of fighting an urban warfare, and of course they're killing everything that moves in that area. And the Americans have another one, sort of at a distance. So they're disagreeing they're really disagreeing on the tactics, not on the strategy. The Americans want Hamas defeated. They want the Israelis out of Gaza. And now I thought the only interesting thing the president said today is that we're going to rebuild the place. Well, good luck with that. I have to see that coming.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's going to take a couple of years for sure. I mean, but you're also talking about the optics here. Just before coming on air, Joe, we got new figures from Hamas saying that the total death toll now stands at least 34,900 and even more. I mean, talking about optics, all these civilians, all these kids who've died, and now we're talking about the small area of Rafah in the south where you have more than 1.5 million people trying to seek refuge. Do you think that today's warning from Joe Biden will actually make any kind of difference there on the ground?
No, as far as Netanyahu is concerned, there's only one winner and one loser, and whatever it takes, he's going to do. Look, those figures are probably conservative. There are thousands of people who have not been counted under the rubble. You have a multiplier of 5 in terms of people who are injured, who are going to die. And then you've got, of course, people dying of famine and other things. You know, I'd be willing to think that we're probably looking at 50, 60,000 dead if we start counting, you know, looking under the rubble in terms of what's going to happen because of the famine and the rest of it. So, you know, the president is probably would like to avert these optics. But, you know, today, you know, the news is about seeing things. And Americans, whether they know anything about Israel or not, whether they could find Gaza on the map or not, they could look at a television screen and see that civilians are being killed left, right, and center with American bombs. And the admission today that that Biden made that people have been killed in Gaza with American weaponry is really quite something. I mean, because what he's saying is that we're responsible too. Well, that's no news to his progressive left, and it's no news to Bernie Sanders. We're going to continue to put the heat. And the president would like to see this kind of go in a different direction. But I believe that Netanyahu and his cabinet couldn't give a damn about Joe Biden's re-election chances because they're fighting for a different kind of existential existence themselves. So if Biden's going to try to, you know, get some help from the Israelis, good luck with that. So he was trying to help himself today.
Help himself. Obviously, he has an election year. Of course, Netanyahu is also trying to stay in power. But I mean, with this admission that you're talking about, U.S. weapons being used to kill civilians in Gaza, what do you think the American public is going to think about that?
Well, look, the American public isn't really as dumb as it looks sometimes. You know, it sees these screens, it sees the imagery, it sees their children now being beaten up on campuses for supporting the Palestinians. You know, it's coming home to roost. As it did during the Vietnam War, President Nixon could count on the silent majority that is the great support of the American people. Today, the silent majority has disappeared, and I think they're going to hold Joe Biden accountable. Does Donald Trump have the answer to this? No. The thing is that right now, the American electorate, particularly the young people, would like to hold Joe Biden accountable. And of course, there are all kinds of people who say that he's a war criminal, and by definition, he is. And that's very, very hard. You know, it's pretty hard to shake that off and to admit that the weapons you give to your ally are used to kill innocent civilians. Let me tell you, I'd hate to look at that testimony again in a court of law down the road, because that's the kind of thing that will kill you.
Joe Siracusa, always good to have you here on the show here at TRT World. Thank you so much for joining us from Perth, Australia.